Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk about the language of leadership, and we have a great guest here that is going to talk about his new book, which is coming out, called The Language of Leadership. We have Krister Ungerböck here. Krister, welcome to Leaders of Transformation.
Nicole, it's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, and I'm really excited to talk about this subject because as we were planning this topic, there are so many things that I think are really hot topics right now in business, whether our listeners have a larger business or whether that they're growing a team. These are key issues. So I'm excited to get into it. Before we do, though, I want to certainly welcome our listeners and our viewers, if you're watching on video, for being here, because you're the reason why we do this podcast. I love talking to great people who are doing amazing things in the world, but I love recording it so that I can share it with you so that you can be inspired and learn from all these amazing people. So we're excited that you're here. I also want to do a little shout out to Interview Valet, and I want to thank them for supporting our podcast. They have sent me such amazing guests, as many of our booking agents have, and they're the reason why I'm having this conversation with Krister, because they introduced me to him. So thank you to Tom Schwab and his team. You guys are awesome. And one last thing as well is that I'm excited about a new book that I have that just came out, which is called Power Up Superwomen. And it is stories of courage and empowerment from women from all around the world, different diverse backgrounds that have been through struggle. They've been through illnesses and relational breakups and, family breakups and all sorts of struggles across the board. And they have overcome those struggles and been able to unleash that inner superwoman within them. And so my chapter is called Worthiness from Within. And I share my own personal story with that and give you some tips on how you can build your self-esteem and your self-confidence and be amazing. So I encourage you to get a copy of that. You can go to leadersoftransformation.com/resources, and it is available there. So let's get back to Krister, who, speaking of books, has an amazing book coming out in the fall of 2019 this year. And let me give you a little bit more background on him. He is actually a keynote speaker, a CEO coach, and a global expert in the area of the language of leadership. Prior to retiring at the age of 42, Krister was an award-winning CEO of one of the largest family-owned software companies in the world. His expertise in the language of leadership is based on his own unique experience as a global CEO, leading teams in 3 languages while observing and doing business with executives in over 40 countries, building businesses in 6 of those countries and living in 3. As a corporate keynote speaker, he's passionate about sharing these secrets that he's used with his team and how he's won 5 consecutive top workplace awards and has achieved remarkable levels of employee engagement, up to the tune of 99.3% employee engagement. So if you're a leader and you're leading a team, that I'm sure has got your attention, because how do you do that? Most people, most companies are complaining about having low employee engagement, and here he is having almost a near perfect record. So pretty impressive. Krister, let's talk just to start off with this book. You mentioned earlier to me that this book is unique, it's vulnerable. What really was the impetus to writing this book?
So my most profound insights did actually not come while I was a CEO of this, one of the largest family-owned software companies in the world. They actually came while the day that I found myself at the YMCA. And a woman was sitting there typing my responses to a gym application into her computer. And she asked me the question that changed my life. She asked me, "Who is your emergency contact?" And in that moment, I broke down crying because I had no one, or I thought I had no one in that moment. And here I was, a leader of this global company, and I'm looking in the mirror, eyes swollen with tears, realizing that I have no followers. I had spent my entire life reading books and listening to podcasts, trying to master the tools of business leadership. Yet in that moment, I was unable to inspire followership within my own family. Clearly we had done a good job mastering these tools of business leadership. We grew 3,000% from, a handful of people in St. Louis, Missouri to hundreds of employees in 8 countries worldwide. But then I started to ask myself, like, what was I missing, right? And so at that time, that was when I retired as CEO, and I started a journey looking in all the places that, frankly, I probably would have judged as a CEO as kind of far out or far-fetched, but always keeping my kind of business practical CEO hat on. I found myself in a lot of rooms where people would talk about the universe and, a lot of these kind of new age thinking. And I found some really deep, profound insights. And what I found is that often these insights are lost in some of the kind of the new age language. And so I was always there kind of think, how can I translate some of this in words that people like my old self would actually still listen to? And that was really kind of the impetus of the journey of the language of leadership. So part of what happened at this moment, you talked about the book, the Superwoman book. And so essentially I went through, I initiated a business divorce with my family business shareholders. And then simultaneously, my wife initiated a marital divorce essentially at the same time. So essentially my whole life was gone. And but I had to look at the common denominator, which was me. And so the book is about practical leadership tips, but it's also about really kind of a framework for transformation. When we go through divorce, whether it's a business divorce or a marital divorce, we all think it's like, well, irreconcilable differences. But what if those irreconcilable differences just weren't as irreconcilable as we once thought? And what I found is over this kind of 3-4 year journey, that there's actually a framework for recovering those relationships and making them the best they can possibly be. That doesn't mean you're going to continue to be married to your business partners or your marriage partners, but you can still make those relationships as strong as possible. And then I think that the key was really, as I kind of went through it, is I don't know, it was taking some of the language, the lessons that I learned, learning to lead in French and German as an adult. So I'd learned to lead in English. And then when I moved to Europe after September 11th to start our businesses there, I actually had to learn how to lead in languages that I couldn't speak, which really got me really present to the words that I use. And so that's a big impetus for the book, is trying to break down leadership in relationships down to concrete language and words that we use that can lead to more emotional intelligence, more emotional connection, ultimately more employee engagement, and more results from people in business. And so that's kind of how the language of leadership was born.
Very interesting. Well, I mean, leadership, some people look at leadership as a role, as a position. John Maxwell certainly has written about that a number of in all of his books, talking about the levels of leadership and that it goes much further beyond that. But a lot of times people don't even see themselves as leaders. I didn't even see myself as a leader until people started saying, you're such a great leader. And I'm thinking, I would lead a team, but I never really equated that to being a quote unquote leader. I was just doing my thing, and knowing, and a visionary certainly, and all those things. But that leadership, once I became present to it, then I realized how it played out in my personal life, what you're talking about there. Yeah. And we realize we lead in all areas of our life. So this isn't just a conversation, even though many of our listeners are CEOs and lead teams, but this is a conversation for everyone because we're all leaders.
Yeah. So I think the part of what I see is that, one, I actually didn't have that many people who told me I was a good leader for most of my career. I was actually, for probably the first 15 years, I was actually kind of a jerk, and I didn't even know it until about 2010. But the part of this is, one of the premises behind my book and what I've learned over the last couple of years is that I believe that the number one destructor of business value is broken relationships. Like the salespeople don't like the marketing people, the service people don't like the salespeople, and everybody doesn't like the finance and sometimes HR people, right? So there's this ton of there's an unseen potential for growth and increase in net income by helping people, not talking about just how to manage conflict, but how do we transform conflict and make it go away?
Yes.
And so that was really the function. I really found that in part of these kind of exploring outside of the traditional business world was really looking into, if I can take the same principles that transform marriages that are just basically falling apart, and we can apply those in business and do it in a professional way, not like, marriage counseling. So we can start to transform these relationships at work where people just aren't getting along and they're spending all these time at the water cooler kind of, bitching about stuff. And like, that's getting in the way of them getting work done.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I love that. So let's talk about the language of leadership. We're talking around it, but what is it?
So the language of leadership is really three things. It's practical fill in the blanks phrases for leading in a more emotionally intelligent way, driving greater business growth and more employee engagement. So and the second thing is it's a set of kind of fun or, perspective changing experiments. Like we'll probably talk about the Magic Management 8-Ball Challenge. I've got my Magic Management 8-Ball, just to kind of shift some of our perspective as leaders on how we lead. And then the third is it's some insights about our relationships with ourselves and our relationships with others that kind of help shift our thinking out of kind of into a way where we have more control over or more influence over how the quality of our relationships, both professionally and personally. So the language of leadership is actually not just about professional leadership. It's really transcends professional and personal.
Got it. So when I think of language, I think of words. So the power of words. Then you talk about even the questions. So give us some examples. If somebody was looking at and saying, okay, I don't know that I'm a good leader, and I need to improve, or I've been told that I'm a jerk, right? Yes, I've been told that I'm a great leader. I've also had people, there's almost like the silence, the dangerous silence of no comment.
Yes.
When I first started out, when I would be pushing, I remember at one point in time in my business, I was driving towards an outcome and I achieved the outcome. It's almost like I won the battle and I lost the war.
Yeah. Because
I achieved the outcome and the team followed to that point. But then after that, they started checking out.
So what the divorce researchers call that is they call it stonewalling, which looks a lot like listening, but it's basically when people are basically saying, when is she going to stop talking? I mean, I already got the instructions. I'm going to go do that. And it's actually one of the 4 predictors of divorce, both in professional relationships as well as personal relationships.
Yes. Yeah, I remember this gentleman, Dan Tacchini, called it cordial hypocrisy. Oh yeah, that's a great idea. It was partly like just reminds me of it. He says, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And then you walk out of the room and they're like, she has no idea what the hell she's talking about. How often does that happen?
Yeah. So your question, so here's an example of how the language of leadership works. So it was actually, I learned this from my French teacher of all things. So if you look up the word, so let's talk about emotional intelligence. So one of the languages in the book is the language of emotional intelligence. I was a software engineer, not the most emotionally intelligent person, read all the books, Daniel Goleman, emotional intelligence, still not emotionally intelligent. But it was when I found language that I was able to say that while my heart was in the right place, my words were not. So if you look up the word to feel in an English thesaurus, you'll see that one of the synonyms for the word to feel is think. But if you were to go in a French or German thesaurus, or French, and you look up the word sentir, which is to feel, you will not find the word penser, which is to think. So English speakers especially have a challenge in emotional intelligent communication. And we make one very common mistake we make is I say, I feel that you betrayed me. I feel like you should get this project done earlier, or I feel like you're late, or so the words are when I say I feel that, fill in the blank, strike the word that or like after the words I feel. Because when I say I feel that or I feel like, you're actually talking about a thought. So now
you're disassociating yourself with it, and then
exactly. So the antidote is I feel emotion word. I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel hurt. I feel afraid. And so the next most common issue with emotional intelligent communication is that, so now I'm using I feel emotion word. So there's actually a number of emotion words that are actually what I call false emotions. So I feel betrayed. I feel disappointed, right? So false emotions almost always in English ends in the word ed. So let's say I feel betrayed. I feel disappointed, right? So here's how you know we have a false emotion. You blank me. You betrayed me, Nicole.
Right.
You disappointed me, Nicole. So what I'm doing is I'm saying an emotion, but what I'm really saying is that I'm actually making a judgment or to some degree an accusation of you. So when you look at these emotions that end in the word ed, at least make a little flag for yourself. Like, yeah, maybe that's not really an emotion. So what I try to do is I come back to the core emotions: mad, sad, glad, afraid, hurt. And hurt, you could even say, is you hurt me, is it's a little bit on the, but that's how we start to really develop connection. Is like the next thing that comes into that is that when I was a leader, probably the most common emotion that I see in business among leaders is anger. Right? I'm angry that you were late on that project. I'm angry that you showed up for work. I'm angry about all this kind of stuff. But anger is not a primary emotion. Anger disconnects. If I say I'm angry or I feel angry, that disconnects us. So whenever I feel anger, the psychologist will say, so what's the emotion that you're experiencing behind the anger? And usually in a business setting, it's fear, hurt, or sadness. So even hurt is kind of sadness. If you hurt me, then I feel sad about that. So almost always I say, so great example, I deal with entrepreneurs or CEOs or, executives. So imagine, especially an entrepreneur who's in a smaller business, someone delivers a proposal or a poor quality proposal to your largest customer, right? This is something I'd be really angry about. But am I really angry, or am I afraid that we're going to lose that big project, or we're going to lose our biggest customer? And if I have a conversation with you and say, hey, I'm angry about the quality of that proposal, now you're afraid. And the neuroscience shows that when you're afraid, the part of your brain for creativity shuts down. But if I say, hey, Nicole, I'm afraid, right? I'm afraid that if we lose this big customer, now I'm pulling you towards me, and assuming you don't hate me as a boss, you're going to want to be like, oh, I don't want Krister to be afraid. What can I do that? And so now you're kind of coming from a point of empathy. The creative parts of your brain are still working rather than being in a state of fear yourself. You're in a state of empathy and you're wanting to help, right? So again, this is just an example of I feel blank. Don't say I feel that. Don't say I feel like. This is an example of how applying this, basically this is how my French teacher, I have a funny story. I was in France, and one of our first customers was the Palais de Festival de Cannes. So they're the hosts of the Cannes Film Festival. And I had 6 years of French in high school. My French was terrible. No one would even speak back to me in French on the street. I said, I just need to go down and practice. And they didn't speak English down there. So I did a 3-day workshop in French. And I called the sales guy on my team on Monday for the feedback from the client. And he said, boss, I don't really know how to say this to you, but they said, don't ever send him back here. His French is terrible. And so 2 weeks later, I found the best French teacher business French teacher in all of France, according to the European Wall Street Journal. And I walked into his home. He said, Krister, what did you say to the people at the Palais de Festival de Cannes? And I told him my words in French. He goes, do you know what you just said? Like 100 times to these executives. You said, you should do this. You need to do this. And I said, well, what's the antidote, right? And so he said, well, I'm sure we've all heard, don't use the word should, right? So instead of saying you should do blank, just drop you should. Do this. You should do this. You should show up to work on time. Show up to work on time. And if that feels too strong and too harsh for you, then say, consider doing this, right? So it was this fill in the blanks approach of how he basically helped me to kind of change my words in a really practical way that I found was kind of the bridge to making sure that while my heart was in the right place, that my words were matching where my heart was.
It's very interesting because that explains a lot in our culture, with people not being able to, myself included, not being able to communicate and connect to our emotions,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't have the language, almost the language, our language. I say our words create our world. Our language actually deceives us, or diminishes our ability. What I'm hearing you say is to actually feel the emotions, to connect to it, and to communicate effectively. Because when we say, I'm angry, like you use that example, if I'm angry, now you're making another person afraid. It reminds me of, one time, one of my mentors said, you're either coming from a place of love or fear. There's really only two core states, our emotions, and then everything else stems from that. And I thought about that, and I'm an analytical person, so when I argue things like, oh, is that really true, rather than just taking it at face value. And I realize that's so true. So if we're not coming from a place of love, those empowering, loving, not mushy words, but words that are coming from a place of abundance and connection and collaboration and communication, they're coming from that place of fear. So whereas other cultures have a very different approach to their language. It's very, very interesting. So how this plays out in leadership, like you used a couple of examples, maybe talk about how, let's say, for example, if there is a conflict, you mentioned about people not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? How do you get it across? You could say, consider this, but then they might say, well, okay, I considered it, right?
Yeah.
So, you need to get something done. You have a vision. A lot of CEOs are drivers. They're doers. They're visionaries.
I know. I was.
You are one.
Yeah.
So how do you get stuff done and bring the people along with you without offending the process?
There's two other things that we could come back to love later if you want. I talk about actually how the research into romantic love actually applies in the workplace.
Sure.
But let's address this thing. So what I find is, so one of the things quotes I say is like, in order to get an enthusiastic yes, you have to give people permission to say no. So often we as leaders, and I myself was a terrible victim of this, or whatever, perpetrator, or whatever you want to call it, is we lead from the language of what I call the language of expertise. And the language of expertise is the language of solutions, the language of answers, right? And so I am the boss, I know this area, or I know my business, I know whatever, and I give people all the answers. So one of the people that I came in contact with over my journey was this guy who was a peace activist. He's actually no longer alive now, but he wrote it was actually never on any bestseller list, but it sold millions of copies worldwide. And one of his key insights was that we listen for people's needs, not their words. So if I'm a leader who has a line of people outside of my office waiting for answers from me, or 300 emails in my inbox a day of things that people are waiting, what need am I filling? Is it my need to be an expert? Is it my need to be kind of, validating myself? Or, there's some need there. So the thing about the language of expertise is it's seductive. It makes me feel good. I used to love it when I would go and be like, I gave them the answer that's going to save them, 2 months of work doing the wrong thing. Right. And so it's seductive to us as speakers to speak the language of expertise. It's also seductive to the employees who just want to shut off at 5 p.m. and not think about work until 9 a.m. the next day, because we give them all the answers and they don't have to worry about it because, boss is going to give them the answers. But there's one group of people, and you probably don't want to have a ton of those people who shut off at 5 p.m. and show up at 9 a.m. the next day, because that means that you as the leader are the one who's waiting to give them the answers and thinking about your email and thinking about all their problems the next day. But there's one category of employee that really does not like to be led with the language of expertise, and they hate the language of expertise, and that's top performers. Top performers, like the people who are listening to this podcast. So top performers aren't the people who sat in the test and wanted to copy the answer from the person sitting next to them. They want to come up with the answers themselves. So often, the reason why people don't do things is either we didn't give them permission to say no. So let's say you come to me with a problem. I could start giving you my advice on what you should do. Or I could literally just insert a question like, hey, how open are you to, I think I've got an idea. How open are you to that? Would you like to have my idea? And simply the subconscious moment of you saying yes is actually going to make you more receptive to actually executing my idea. Now, there's one exception to that. If you're just saying yes because you think you don't have actual permission to say no, then we haven't gotten any further. But my point is that as a leader, if I'm telling you what to do and you're not listening and you're just saying in your mind, yeah, I'm going to do whatever I think is right anyway, I'm wasting my time.
Yeah.
I can spend the next 45 minutes outlining my solution to you. And if you're not really planning to do it, or you're just going to phone it in, I've wasted the 45 minutes of my time. So ask for permission. And if someone, sometimes it's even say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how certain are you of what the solution is? Because if you say 9 or 10, then tell me about what you think the solution is, rather than me wasting 45 minutes of me telling you what the solution is.
Right.
If you say 6, like, okay, maybe there's a little bit more of a window. Or on a scale of 1 to 10, how open are you to the solution that I think I have in mind? So by asking on a scale of 1 to 10, you give people a little bit of, latitude to say 6 or 4 or 8. And about how big is the window of openness to my suggestion.
Mm.
So this is, again, the language of leadership is all about really concrete phrases with which to kind of overcome these practical challenges in leadership.
Yes. And questions hook the mind. So when you ask a question, then it engages their mind as opposed to a statement. This is what I think you should do. And then they're like, okay, now they're evaluating as opposed to creating. Yeah, it's really powerful. Reminds me of when you were talking about that, successful people, I'm talking about super successful people that continue to grow and thrive and innovate. They don't assume to know all the answers. They just ask really good questions, which is what you're talking about here, is asking these questions. I've been around brilliant minds, and they ask questions that the average person would think is a stupid question, but they're like, there's no stupid questions.
Yeah.
And it's like, even for example, you and I, kudos to you, even just before this podcast, you asked me questions that most of my guests don't ask that. Now, this is your business to do this, right? To ask really good quality questions, but you asked deeper questions because you wanted to make sure that you understood what we were going to do, what we were going to talk about, that it was going to flow well, and all of this. And you didn't assume anything because you've done tons of podcasts and you're like, I got this.
Yeah.
And I know that's been a danger for me. I know when I was in my 20s and we had a very successful family business, like very successful, I thought, I got this. Like,
I've been there. Yeah.
I'm like, I know what I'm doing here. Got this down pat. And that's the pride before the fall, right? Because then I realized I got shit.
Did you find yourself at the YMCA crying in a mirror after being asked who was your emergency contact, perchance?
Not quite what we end up doing is when the business all fell apart, we realized, and I had to unpack it and go back and say, what did I learn from this? What did we learn from this? And how can I apply that? But because that's a whole other story, but another podcast. When I'm the guest on the show, we can talk about that, but here we'll talk.
Or I could come back and we could talk about the language of leadership in families.
Oh, that's a good topic. Yeah. Family businesses, which I just had this flashback to my dad and my brother, and my mother. When my dad owned garage businesses, and my brother, loved the mechanics and so forth. So he worked with him. And then my mother, he had coerced her into doing the paperwork.
Yeah.
So she was there.
Common family business scenario. Yep.
So I'm the youngest. So when I was old enough, I said 3 Jansens in a business is enough.
Yeah.
Please do not. I will do anything. I will cut the grass. I will clean the house. I will do all the other stuff. We had another business. I'll do that, but not that business, because literally my brother would quit twice a week, and my father would fire him 3 times a week. And my mother was in the middle of all that because, it's like, you know what your son did, right? It's always your son.
Well, it's interesting, like I guess we don't have to talk about my story because I think you just told it. So.
Oh, is that?
in any family business,
similarities.
there's a lot of similarities. So here's the thing.
Yes.
At the end of the day, I would almost guarantee that if you read my book all the way through to the end, the most powerful part is actually towards the end. And you asked yourself, if my family had practiced these languages of leadership, I suspect that even if one or two people in your family had practiced some of these things, that you would not have ended up in that situation. And that was really why I wrote the book. I know that now, having read the book to my father, and it's got some pretty raw stories in there, that it's already actually me reading my book to him has already started to transform our relationship.
That's amazing. That's amazing and encouraging I know for a lot of people. Yeah.
We want to talk about questions though.
Yes. Let's talk about that.
So I'm leading from expertise and I want to give it a shot. So I'm not really recommending they actually do this because in front of employees, but it's an experiment to kind of break some of our assumptions about leadership.
Go for it.
So I was in this, is in a workshop by a guy named David Rock, who wrote a book, Quiet Leadership and The Brain at Work and a bunch of other things, a lot of neuroscience around, how the brain works in leadership. And so what he did is there was this canned list of questions that if I told you the list of questions, you'd be like, there is no way that brings you to insight. It was just like, how long have you been thinking about this? Or blah, 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 blah. So I thought that'd be great. Let's just come up with a canned list of questions and let's come up with an experiment, which I call the Magic Management 8-Ball Challenge. Shake it up. It gives you an answer. And then you just look it up in the list of questions and we'll just ask questions randomly. So we have a business problem. So imagine, you can try this, or anybody, listeners can try it. I do have a link on my website they can download that has the list of questions. Call together, you've got some business problem challenge, call together your team, 5-6 people. And then how the leader prepares is just shake the management 8-ball or just randomly pick questions off the list. And so rather than me preparing for this meeting by coming up with all the answers, I am going to lead with questions. So one of the things I say in the book is, are you leading with questions or are you following with answers? Questions lead, answers follow. And so many of us as leaders are really following our people with questions rather than following our people with answers rather than leading them with questions. So imagine you've got a problem and you don't say anything about the solutions you have in your mind. You're just going to kind of facilitate these 5 people, shake the management 8-ball, and you say, we're going to pick a question off the list. And it's often our most powerful insights are in the words left unsaid. What's been left unsaid here? And just let people answer. Or
good.
What questions have we not yet asked that we should? This is a good one for just a one-on-one conversation. So rather than me giving the answers to you, what 3 options are you considering and why? And if people don't have good options, then I have much better window to make my own suggestions. So again, here's the power of leading with questions. If I'm going to go into a meeting and I'm going to basically try to convince my team to go forward with my solution, how many thought cycles does that take? Versus taking a list of 15 questions and picking 3 to 5 randomly off the list takes 0 time. So when you think about how to lead differently and work-life balance and not have 300 emails every day waiting in your inbox for answers, starting to lead with questions actually gets us out of the cycle. And it's one of the things I say, I realized as our business grew, and especially as our company got to over 100 employees, there is no way I could lead with solutions and answers because I can't there's not enough hours in the day for me to come up with the solutions and answers to what 20 people have every day, let alone 100 or 500.
And it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure on you where, you've got to come up with all the answers. I mean, there is so much stress in that. Yeah. What if I don't? Everybody's relying on me.
Yeah. So that's part of we probably won't have time to talk about the language of curiosity goes into like some very specific questioning techniques. I had another interesting story. I had another French experience. I was at the Palais des Congrès de Paris, which is the Paris Convention Center. We were in an 8-hour meeting. There was a guy named Julien who worked for me who was leading the meeting. He was a native French speaker. I spoke maybe like 200 words the entire day. And we got to the end of the meeting, the elevator doors closed, and this guy, Pierre-Jean, said, "Krister, your French is excellent." And I literally, elevator doors closed, and I looked over at Julien and said, "I didn't talk at all." But it was my French tutor, Jean-Luc, who said, "Hey, Krister, here's a trick to get through meetings." I call it the unquestioned technique. So let's say you say, "Krister, we've got a big problem with a major customer." Then I say, "Big problem?" And pick some words out of what you just said and ask it with kind of a questioning tone. So if you don't speak French very well and you're in an 8-hour meeting with a bunch of people speaking French at 200 syllables a minute, you can get by and people will think, "Oh, your French is great." They might think your leadership is great too, So it's, again, these really practical tips that are the basis of the language of leadership for leading in a different way that drives more emotional intelligence and employee engagement.
Oh my goodness, I love this. There's so much more that we could talk about, even the employee engagement. Well, you've demonstrated it here, how you can win awards for having the highest rated employee engagement, 99.3%. You start asking these questions. I mean, I think it would shock employees who've maybe come from other companies who don't have that experience. You start asking them, "What do you think? What questions, what is unsaid? What thoughts do you have about this?" That in itself, it engages people at such a profound level. So really, really good. I think the next step is for people just to go and get a copy of your book. I know it's coming out in October. They can pre-order. You have talk a little bit about your beta that you're doing.
So I'll just address that employee engagement real briefly. So people, because it seems kind of unbelievable. We ask our employees every year, would you like to be working for this organization 1 year from today? And so 99.3% said they agree or strongly agree with that statement. And so the fundamental secret to building an employee engagement culture like that is build better bosses. All the research shows 70% of employee engagement is a function of the behavior of the boss. And the language of leadership is one practical fill in the blanks way to build better bosses. So the book will be pushed. If you're going to build better bosses, you would want to start on Bosses Day, right? Which is October 16th. So that's when the book will be released. But in the interim, my intention is really to make this, there's a slight possibility that I think that based on the feedback I've gotten from about 100 beta readers so far, who actually read much worse versions of the book than will be released, is that one said it was the best book that he read in his entire life. Another person said it was better than any Brene Brown. So I almost cried when I heard those words because I had, But I'm still improving the book, making it better. So this is what the beta reader program is. So people who come to the website. So there's actually a bunch of, I wanted to keep the book less than 250, 300 pages. So there are actually a bunch of deleted chapters that some readers actually said were really good, but they just weren't good enough to justify taking the book to 350 or 400 pages. So people can download those deleted chapters. I'm going to be releasing them in advance of the book about encouragement, empowering productivity through positivity, for example. People who are kind of right when this podcast is released, I'm looking for beta readers who will basically be the haters and be like, "Krister, I'm going to tell you what I hated about this book." And that's how I've taken this book from what was honestly 6 months ago a terrible book. It helped that had been coached in collaboration with authors of over 20 New York Times bestsellers, and I've been able to stand on the shoulders of giants in that way. Tell me what sucks about this book, because I want to make sure the book that comes out on October 16th is a powerful, powerful book. So please come to krister.com/LOT. Krister with a K.com/LOT, and you can become a beta reader and help me make this a book that can help change people's lives and businesses.
Awesome. Krister, thank you so very much. And those are powerful words that people have shared with you. And again, you're demonstrating it here, even with your book, rather than coming out with this book and saying, "Ta-da, here's what I think." You're saying, "Here's what I have. What do you all think about it?" Getting feedback and adjusting. And so you're actually getting reader engagement. I love it. It's awesome. And a great lesson, even for myself, as I'm writing further books. I want to be able to do that as well and take that example from you and follow that. So Krister, thank you so very much. For our listeners and our viewers, go to krister.com/LOT. That's Krister with a K. We'll make sure that that link is in the show notes as well on leadersoftransformation.com. And so you can be a beta reader. And ultimately, once the book comes out and it's live as of October 16th, 2019, then you can order a copy of the book as well, the finished copy. And it sounds like it's going to be an incredible, incredible read. We'll certainly be promoting it here at leadersoftransformation.com and on our social media and so forth. Yes, Krister.
And the other thing is, because this is going to come out in April, like I'm going to start video blogging some of the key content. So people who sign up for the book just to get updates on the book, you'll get, either see on social media. So a lot of the key content is going to come out, because part of the premise of the book is that I want to leave people to exercises that after they read the book, they can do with their teams. So I'm going to be creating videos that essentially accompany the book to help people put some of these things into practice. So all that stuff's going to be released before the book's out.
Great. And also that list of those questions that you have, I think would be fantastic to get a list of those. So that's great. Awesome. Well, you know what? I always say at the end of almost every episode, I say, leaders, take action. So take action with something today. Consider the language. What are the words you're using? What are the questions that you ask? Even taking out the, feel like that, just get connected to the feeling that you're having, being specific and intentional about your language. Even considering whether or not you are employing a little bit too much of that language of expertise. People are coming to you for answers. If you're the answer person, maybe you want to reframe that and be the question person, so that you can empower people who are working with you, people in your families, empower them and have them enroll them and have them buy in to the solution. People are a lot more enthusiastic about things that they had and ideas that they actually had involvement in. So I encourage you to do that. And sign up to be a beta reader with Krister's book. Make sure you get a copy of his book when it comes out. And we look forward to hearing your stories. You can find us on leadersoftransformation.com, of course. You can also go on Facebook at the Leaders of Transformation. We love to hear your stories. And if you like this episode on iTunes, please leave us a rating and review. It helps us to get a greater reach. We have listeners in over 100 countries. We want to continue to extend that out so we can help people to believe that they're capable of being a leader of transformation. And as specifically as what we're talking about here is teaching this language of leadership to more people. So we encourage you to go and do that. Appreciate your support. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.